Halfland, an ahistorical prehistory. The Battle of Throstead. In the 111th year of the Common Reckoning, the Purge pox swept through the dark hills, and Olvir marched on the hill-hold, claiming that the gods had chosen him to bring the people back to their old ways of righteousness, and, by thus cleansing the folk, drive the plague from the land. 1,000 dwarves marched behind Olvir, these divided into two groups. Straggling behind came a miscellaneous assortment of some 700 women and children. In the midst of this group strode a wild-eyed lady dwarf with a new-born babe at her breast, who berated those around her, demanding that they mend their ways and repent of their past wrongdoings. This was Katla, Olvir's wife, and the self-styled voice of heaven. This group did not participate in the battle, a task that they left to the 300 male dwarves of fighting age who marched before them. These fighting dwarves could be subdivided into two groups. The first group consisted of Olvir and his 70 retainers. These retainers were equipped for, and had some experience of, fighting, either with the crossbow or with spear and shield. The second group consisted of dwarves from varied backgrounds who had joined Olvir's cause. Some of these were dressed in mail, bearing weapons of war. Others were naked fanatics, carrying crude clubs, driven to a frenzy by Katla's polemic. The route Olvir followed descended from the dark hills by way of a gentle valley. At the bottom of the valley, where it opened onto the plain, stood the farm known as Throstead, and it was here that Olvir found his brother-in-law, Ingvar, waiting for him. There was no love lost between Ingvar and Olvir. Ingvar resented Olvir, considering that Olvir had been the sole inheritor of much wealth that should have been shared with Olvir's sisters, and in particular with Olvir's eldest sister, Halberta, who was Ingvar's wife. For his part, Olvir saw Ingvar as the corrupt lackey of a decadent crown. Now, whether Ingvar was corrupt, or the crown he served decadent, is a matter of opinion. But there is no doubt that Ursa, the Queen Mother, trusted him. At Ursa's urging, Asta, the Queen of the Dwarves of the Dark Hills, had put Ingvar in command of all the fighting dwarves at her disposal, and sent him to intercept and defeat Olvir. If Ingvar failed in this task, the hillhold would be left defenceless. Ingvar had around 120 spear dwarves, which he arrayed in a line across the valley floor. Wooded slopes rose to their left. To their right were the walled fields of Throstead, and lining those field walls, Ingvar positioned his 80 crossbow dwarves, under his personal command. As Olvir led his followers down the valley, these ranks of troops confronted him. He halted, and the tramp of feet behind him faded away. And then a great cry arose, and Olvir's dwarves surged forward. In the centre of this charge, Olvir and his retainers kept formation, but the throng of dwarves around them had no such discipline, each of them running full tilt at the enemy with no thought of tactics or cohesion. Ingvar ordered his crossbow dwarves to shoot into the chaotic horde rushing toward them, but the volley of bolts that they loosed had little apparent effect. On Ingvar's left, his spear dwarves had started to march forward in close formation, spear points menacingly lowered. It was now the turn of Olvir's crossbow dwarves to shoot a volley of crossbow bolts. Several of Ingvar's spear dwarves fell, and some of their colleagues recoiled out of line, backing away from the enemy. But these were well-drilled royal spear dwarves, and, even as a second volley of well-directed crossbow bolts found its mark, shouted orders from the officers reformed the quavering dwarves, ready to face the onrushing foe. However, the officers' work was soon undone. For now the first wave of screaming naked fanatics crashed into the redressed ranks of the spear dwarves, again throwing them back and into disorder. But once more the spear dwarves regrouped, and, for now, they held firm. On the other side of the battlefield, Olvir, accompanied by his retinue of spear dwarves and an assorted mob of his followers, charged towards Ingvar and his crossbow dwarves. Many of the unarmoured fanatics were shot down, but the charge was not broken. Olvir and a number of his dwarves reached the wall where Ingvar and his crossbow dwarves were stationed. Many of the crossbow dwarves were killed in the ensuing melee, and the remainder fled as Olvir's dwarves surged over the wall. Ingvar did not run. It might have been better for him if he had. He was slaughtered where he stood. Meanwhile, Ingvar's spear dwarves had pushed back the foes assailing them, inflicting many casualties. But the respite thus earned was only temporary. As each attacker fell, another took his place. And now the royal spear dwarves were caught between hammer and anvil, as Olvir regathered the band of dwarves who had slain Ingvar and advanced upon their rear. And that was the end. The battle broke up into a confused mass of individual combats. Surrounded and swarmed by enemies that outnumbered them, the royal spear dwarves were scattered, and many of them were slain. But they did not die in vain. In the confused melee, Olvir was run through by a spear and killed on the spot. About 40 of the royal spear dwarves managed to fight their way clear and bring tidings of the defeat back to the hillhold. And on the field of death that they left behind them, Katla wept over Olvir's corpse, proclaimed her infant son Otkul as the rightful king of all the dwarves, and swore divine vengeance on Ursa and Asta. Thus ended the Battle of Throstead.